Ready to dive into something kind of fascinating today.
Always. What have you got for us?
Well, we're going to unpack how our emotions change as we age. Like how we experience things differently as we get older.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
We've got some excerpts from the Oxford Handbook of Emotion, Social Cognition, and Problem Solving in Adulthood.
Okay. Sounds like a light read.
Yeah, tell me about it. It's dense, but super interesting. And our mission is to break down how older adults experience their social worlds.
Debunking some myths about aging along the way.
Exactly. Because you know how people say with age comes wisdom?
Right.
This handbook basically backs that up with, actual science.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
One of the things that surprised me is that even though we might slow down a bit cognitively as we get older,
Yeah, things change.
older adults often report higher levels of emotional well-being.
Interesting. So it's not all downhill after 30.
Apparently not.
Yeah.
And that's where this idea of socio-emotional selectivity theory comes in.
Ooh, that's a mouthful.
Right. But it basically means when we're younger, we're all about exploring everything. New information, new experiences, like chasing all the things.
Makes sense. Got to experience it all.
Totally. But as we get older, the research suggests our focus shifts.
Huh.
We get more selective about what we invest our energy in.
We become more discerning.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we prioritize the people and the things that really light us up, that bring us joy, and those tend to be more positive experiences.
Okay, so instead of trying to do it all, we get better at savoring what truly matters.
Exactly. Like choosing a quiet evening with close friends over that music festival we might have been all about in our 20s.
I see. Quality over quantity.
And this isn't just like a warm and fuzzy idea. There's actual neuroscience behind it.
Oh, really? So our brains actually change?
Yeah, so there's this study in the handbook where older adults were shown a bunch of images, some positive, some negative, and guess what?
What?
They remembered more of the positive images compared to younger adults.
So their brains were focusing on the good stuff.
Right. And it gets even cooler when they looked at the brain activity, the amygdala, the part of our brain that processes emotions.
Right.
It was more active in the older adults when they were looking at those positive images.
Wow. So it's like our brains are literally wired for positivity as we age.
It seems that way. Which makes you think, if we're getting better at focusing on those meaningful connections as we get older, wouldn't we also be more tuned into other people?
Yeah, you'd think so. Like we'd be better at reading emotions.
Right. All those years of experience, you'd think we'd be like human lie detectors.
So what does the research say? Do we become mind readers or what?
Well, it's complicated. And this is where things get super interesting.
Okay, I'm listening.
Well, it's not quite like that, it turns out.
Oh.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive. But the research suggests that sometimes older adults can be a little less accurate when it comes to reading certain negative emotions.
Really?
Yeah, like from facial expressions or, tone of voice.
Huh. You'd think all those years of observing people would make you, like, an expert at that.
Right. You'd think we'd be pros.
So what's going on there?
Well, the handbook talks about a couple of things at play.
Okay.
Like younger adults often have what they call a negativity bias.
A negativity bias, what's that?
So basically, it's like their brains are kind of wired to be on the lookout for potential threats, which often show up as negative emotions.
Makes sense. Gotta stay safe.
Right. So it's like that feeling when you think a friend is mad at you because they're being quiet, but actually they just had a bad day.
Oh, I've totally been there.
Exactly. It's that hair trigger response to anything that could be negative.
Okay, so how does that relate to older adults?
Well, it seems like they process these cues a bit differently.
Differently how?
The research suggests they might have more difficulty putting together different social cues all at once.
Interesting.
And that can sometimes lead to misunderstandings, especially with those more subtle negative emotions.
So it's not that they're not paying attention, it's more like their brains are just processing those signals in a different way.
Exactly. There's this one study mentioned in the handbook. They found that older adults had a harder time telling the difference between direct and averted gaze on angry faces.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a really subtle difference.
Right. And it could totally change how you're reading a situation.
Totally.
It just goes to show that, how we interpret emotions, it's always changing. It's a process.
Right, it's not static.
And it's influenced by, the physical changes in our brains, but also just our whole life experience.
Yeah, everything we've seen and learned along the way.
Speaking of which, there's another fascinating aspect of how our emotions evolve as we age.
Oh, tell me more.
Well, the handbook also says that often older adults are actually better at navigating those tricky interpersonal situations, even with this potential for misreading certain cues.
So it's like telling us to read between the lines, but then also saying, oh, and by the way, sometimes the lines are kind of blurry. Right. It's a bit of a paradox, which the handbook refers to as the wisdom
A
paradox.
wisdom paradox. I like that.
Yeah, so it's this idea that what we might lose in one area, like, say, processing speed as we get older,
Like that quick thinking we might have had when we were younger.
exactly, we might gain in other areas, through all that life experience.
So it becomes less about quick thinking and more about accumulated wisdom.
Exactly. And the handbook talks about this in terms of two types of intelligence,
Hmm.
fluid and crystallized.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Break that down for me.
So fluid intelligence is that ability to think on your feet, right?
Right.
Problem solve, process new information quickly.
Got it. That makes sense.
And that tends to peak earlier in adulthood.
Okay.
But crystallized intelligence, that's where things get really interesting with age.
All right. Tell me more about this crystallized intelligence.
Basically, it's everything we've learned throughout our lives, all the skills, the knowledge, the insights we've gathered along the way.
So it's like a treasure chest of experience.
Exactly. It's what helps us connect the dots, see patterns, and make judgments based on, a deep well of understanding.
So it's less about having all the answers and more about knowing which questions to ask and how to apply all those experiences to new situations.
You got it. And the handbook highlights this as a major reason why older adults often excel at navigating interpersonal issues.
Because they've seen it all before.
In a way, yes. They've encountered countless challenges, seen different communication styles, learned from their mistakes.
It's like they've watched the movie, so they have a better sense of what might happen next.
Right, while someone younger might be caught off guard or react more impulsively.
That's fascinating.
And this accumulated wisdom, it isn't just limited to social situations. The handbook gives examples of how older adults excel in fields that require expertise, strategic thinking.
Like seasoned judges or diplomats.
Exactly. Or mentors, people who guide others based on their vast experience.
That's so empowering. It's like aging isn't just about what we lose, but about the incredible strengths we gain.
I love how you put that. It's not just about getting older. It's about becoming more well-rounded, more insightful.
More wise.
Exactly. But, and this is important, the handbook also acknowledges that it's not all sunshine and roses.
Right. Even the most patient person has their limits.
Exactly. And the handbook delves into this idea called the Strength and Vulnerability Integration Model, or CVI for short.
CVI. Okay, what's that all about?
Essentially, it suggests that while older adults are often really good at handling everyday negativity, those little annoyances we all face,
Right.
they can be more vulnerable to those really intense or prolonged stressors.
So like a traffic jam is no big deal, but a family crisis hits harder.
Exactly. And the handbook points to some interesting research on this.
Okay.
For example, studies have shown that older adults often show less physiological reactivity to mild stressors.
Meaning their bodies don't go into like full-on panic mode as quickly?
Exactly. They've written out more of life's ups and downs, so they've learned that not every stressor is a 5-alarm fire.
Right, they've got that experience to draw on.
However, the flip side is that once those emotions do get triggered, it might take a little longer for them to calm down.
It's like their emotional thermostat is a little slower to adjust.
That's a great way to put it. And it reminds us that aging isn't one size fits all.
Right, everyone's different.
The handbook really emphasizes that, the idea of individual variability.
Just like every stage of life has its own unique challenges and strengths.
And understanding those, both in ourselves and the older adults in our lives, it's crucial for having those meaningful connections across generations.
Absolutely, empathy and understanding are key.
The handbook dives even deeper into how the situations we're in, the roles we play, can really impact our emotional experiences as we age.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, from the surprising ways our brains become wired for positivity as we age, to those fascinating crystallized intelligence superpowers we pick up along the way.
It's quite a journey.
It is. But for our listener out there, what's the key takeaway? What can we actually do with all this knowledge about emotion and aging? What can we actually do with all this knowledge about emotion and aging?
That's a great question, and the good news is this handbook doesn't just present the research, it actually encourages us to think about how we can use this stuff in our own lives.
So it's less about waiting to become wise and more about actively cultivating wisdom as we go through life.
You got it. And it
Yeah.
starts with challenging those old ideas about aging. It's not about decline, it's about evolving.
Right, it's not all downhill from here.
Not at all. Yes, our cognitive abilities change, but we gain so much in terms of emotional intelligence, perspective, and that incredible ability to connect deeply with others.
It's like that idea of meaningful experiences becoming even more important as we get older.
Absolutely. The research really highlights how, as we age, our priorities shift towards those things that bring us joy, strengthen our relationships, and make us feel like we have a purpose.
Mm. So what might those experiences look like? Like, give our listeners some concrete examples.
Sure, it's different for everyone, but there are some common threads like nurturing strong, supportive relationships with family and friends. That's huge.
Yeah, connection is so important.
It really is. And doing things that make us happy and challenge us mentally, whether it's learning a new language, volunteering, or exploring a creative passion.
Oh, I like that. Like finding something you're passionate about and just going for it.
Exactly. And finding ways to contribute to something bigger than ourselves. Leave a positive mark on the world.
It's not about just checking things off a bucket list. It's about finding deep fulfillment in how we choose to spend our time and energy.
You said it. And here's something really cool. The handbook suggests that by embracing these types of experiences throughout our lives, we're not just making our present better.
We're actually investing in our future selves.
Precisely. We're building up that crystallized intelligence, preparing ourselves to handle whatever challenges and joys come our way with more grace and wisdom.
And maybe even a little humor.
Absolutely. A little laughter goes a long way.
This has been such a fascinating conversation. We've busted some myths, uncovered some surprising truths about how our brains and emotions change as we age, and maybe even gained a little wisdom ourselves along the way.
I hope so. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.
And to our listener, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of emotion and aging.
Until next time.